Ancient Greece. It gave us democracy, philosophy, theater, and a shockingly elaborate cultural system for older men to mentor teenage boys. This wasn't some hidden secret. It was a mainstream, socially regulated institution, particularly for the upper classes. They wrote poems about it, debated its ethics and philosophical dialogues, and painted it on their fancy pottery. It was called Pederasty, and trying to understand it is like trying to assemble furniture with instructions written in ancient poetry. You think you get it, but you're probably doing it wrong, and someone's going to get hurt. There was a whole vocabulary for this, a sort of social rule book. The older man was the erastes, the lover, and his job was to pursue. The younger boy, the eromenos, or beloved, was supposed to be in his mid to late teens, and his job was to be coy. He wasn't supposed to enjoy the physical aspect, at least not publicly. That would be unseemly. He was granting his favor in exchange for wisdom, guidance, and an introduction into polite society. It was less a whirlwind romance and more a very awkward long-term internship with bafflingly personal performance reviews. Philosophers like Plato went to incredible lengths to pretty this all up. In his dialogue, the Symposium, he argues that this love, this eros, was a divine ladder. You start by loving one beautiful boy, which then teaches you to love all beautiful bodies, then beautiful minds, and eventually you ascend to loving beauty itself. It's a stunning intellectual argument. Meanwhile, on the island of Thera, you can find ancient graffiti carved into a rock that, roughly translated, says, "Crimon was here and screwed his boy toy." So clearly, some people were more focused on climbing the ladder than others. The Spartans, being Spartans, saw this and immediately thought, how can we weaponize it? Well, that's an interesting theory of battlefield motivation, somewhere between leave no man behind and don't embarrass your boyfriend. The city-state of Thebes took the Spartan idea and dialed it up to 11. They created the Sacred Band, an elite infantry unit composed of 100 pairs of male lovers. That's 300 men, a whole regiment powered by romance. And for about 40 years, they were basically invincible. They smashed the Spartans at Leuctra in 371 BCE, which nobody saw coming. Their strategy was fundamentally based on not wanting to die in front of your significant other. They were finally wiped out by Philip II of Macedon and his son Alexander, who, upon seeing their bodies arranged in pairs on the field, supposedly wept, though it's unclear if it was from pity or from taking notes. Legally, this all existed in a very strange gray area in places like Athens. The act itself between a citizen and a youth wasn't the issue. The problem was money. A law, the graphe hetairesos, could strip a man of his citizenship rights, like speaking in the assembly, if it could be proven he had sold his body for money as a youth. So it was fine to be the pursued eromenos of a powerful man. It was career-ending to be a prostitute. The distinction was based on who was giving the gifts and whether you looked suitably reluctant to accept them. It was a system built on plausible deniability. One of the most bizarre features was its built-in expiration date. The beard. Once the eromenos started growing facial hair, the romantic and physical part of the relationship was supposed to stop. Continuing it was seen as undignified for both parties. He was now a man, and pursuing him was like chasing after an adult, which was just weird, apparently. The former beloved would then go on, marry a girl who was probably about 15, and, if he felt like it, find a new beardless youth to mentor. And so the glorious, deeply confusing circle of life continued, generation after generation. You might be wondering where half the population was during all this. Good question. In Athens, respectable women were mostly invisible, confined to the home. Relationships between women certainly existed, most famously documented in the poetry of Sappho from the island of Lesbos. She wrote passionate, brilliant verses about her love for other women. But the male writers who dominated the historical record were far more interested in their own affairs. So what we have from Sappho are fragments, whispers of a world that men didn't find important enough to properly write down. A shocking turn of events, I know. It's really easy to look at this from our perspective and just label it. But the Greeks didn't have our concept of consent or even our ideas about age. That doesn't make the power imbalance disappear, though. We're still talking about grown, powerful citizen men and teenage boys with very little social standing. The Greeks themselves were conflicted. Plato argues for a purely chaste, intellectual version. Aeschines, a politician, had to defend himself in court against accusations that his own past relationship was basically prostitution. They knew it was a complicated and dangerous game, even if they didn't have the words we would use for it today. When the hyper-masculine, militantly pragmatic Romans eventually conquered Greece, they looked at this whole cultural institution with a mixture of fascination and disgust. To them, the Greek model seemed decadent and soft. Roman morality was brutally simple. If you were a citizen man, you could do whatever you wanted to anyone who wasn't, slaves, foreigners, women, as long as you were the active, dominant partner. Being the passive partner was considered deeply shameful, a surrender of your masculine authority, your virtuous, So, the Romans found pederasty a sign of Greek weakness, which is a pretty bold take from a culture famous for its vomitoriums. For centuries after, Western civilization performed some truly Olympic-level mental gymnastics to deal with this part of Greek history. The Renaissance rediscovered classical texts and art, but they framed it as platonic friendship. Victorian scholars in the 19th century, bless their repressed hearts, translated the text with careful euphemisms or just pretended the awkward bits didn't exist. They wanted the noble democracy and philosophy of the Greeks, not the messy, uncomfortable reality. It became a masterclass in selective reading, creating a sanitized version of the past that was much more palatable for polite society. So, where does that leave us? Judging the past with our values is a fool's errand. They weren't us. Understanding them, however, is the whole point of history. The ancient Greeks weren't saints in togas spouting wisdom. They were complex, flawed people who built a society on principles we find both brilliant and deeply unsettling. They created a system that intertwined education, politics, and romance in a way that is profoundly alien. They were not trying and failing to be modern. They were succeeding spectacularly at being ancient Greeks. And frankly, that is way more interesting. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more historical insights. Thanks for watching, nerds!